how to turn sand into soil. And we live in Florida. We know what sand is, but what is soil? Do you know? Does anyone know? What is this? What is soil? You don't know? What's that stuff made of? Soil has a lot of different things going on in it. And have you ever seen a lot of trees growing right at the beach and that's all that sand? There's lots of trees. Not really, right? There's not a lot of trees that grow there. But in soil, lots of plants can grow. And we're going to talk a little bit about why. In soil, there is rocks that have been broken down. There's atmospheric rain. That's all the rain that when it falls, it breaks apart the rocks. And you have plant particles in there. And when the rocks are broken down, you have minerals from the rocks. You have gases, and there's fungus, and there's, I know, you kids know, there's probably like little tiny bugs. Have you ever dug in the soil and you've seen like little millipedes and centipedes, maybe roly-polies? That's what grows in, that's what's in our soil. So the benefit to that is that we know that soil is really alive. When you dig in the soil, you can see all kinds of movement going on. And when you go out into the woods, into the forest, you can really see that there's a lot of life that is in the soil. So where do we find really good soil? Well, there's a couple of places we find it. We find it in uncut forests. We find it under the quiet waters of like lakes and ponds. We find it in prairies and meadows and where permanent plants are. And where we put mulch and where we put non-tilling systems or non-tillage systems. When we do that, we can actually create good soil. So let's figure out how to make good soil, right? Okay, so one of the problems that we are used to with traditional farming is buying things to put into the ground that we think are going to make it better. But let's talk about some of those problems, okay? It costs money. Wow. Really? Does the forest need money to grow? No, it's just there. It does its thing all by itself. So we don't really need money, but it costs money if we put in fertilizers. How about oil? From the time that you buy your fertilizers, it gets put on a truck. The truck takes oil to bring it with the gas and everything. The plastic that fertilizer is wrapped in is made from oil. And even the products that are in the fertilizers are derivative or they come from oil. So we want to stay away from things that are not natural, that cost money, and that really aren't good for the environment. Another problem with what we buy when we put into the soil are the chemicals that go into it. So we talked a little bit about that with the oil, but some of the things that aren't good are things that kill the plants that are in the ground that are dying. They kill some of the animals that eat off the plants. And then those animals that are sick and that are eating all that yucky stuff, they basically make the soil bad. So that's not good. So let's talk about things we can do to make it better. When we put in natural mulch, when we just mulch the ground, you're taking a tree that was living, that's broken down into small bits, and when it gets into the ground, all the little animals that are in that soil, they come up and they chew it and break it down. And as they chew it and break it down, also funguses from the rain that settle in, they create an environment for a living system to come in. So when we have sand, one of the things we like to do is dig in it, right? So we dig in the sand, we make a system by specifically digging in the sand and putting in layers of material that are natural, that will naturally break down and change the sand into soil. And I've got a good example. Would you like to come up and help me? Would you like to come up? Okay. Can you take the lid off of this? We're gonna bring it over here. Let's bring it right here and you take the lid off. It's kind of yucky. What's that? Do you recognize any of that stuff? Do you see lemons? You see an old apple? That's coffee, and that's green beans. Now these are things that we eat usually. They're food, but they're natural. And these are chemical-free foods. And right here, I've got them in a nice container, so even if I kept it in my kitchen for a little while, it's not going to completely stink because it's a sealed container. And as that stuff is getting yucky and it gets full, what we want to do is we want to put it down into the ground and let it break down. And look what happens. Will you help me over here too on this one? Lift this one up. Okay, come over here right where that, right where this is, and I'll let you take this and move it around, and we're going to hold this up this way and take a look at that. Can you put that in there and dig a little bit? See what's going on? It's kind of yucky. Oh, what is that? Do you see it? Worms, right? There's worms in there, and look what they're doing. They're turning some of that produce and those vegetables into soil. So we have holes in there on the very bottom. There was holes, and we had some earthworms that liked this area really well. And we put in some leaves. We put in some dirt that was in the ground, and we added some earthworms to it. And then the rest of it was just our old fruits and vegetables that we dumped in there. And it became a great place to make really good soil. So when I get a plant, I don't have to go to the store and get a package of dirt. I've already got dirt right here that is great, and it'll grow all kinds of things in there, all kinds of fruits and plants for us to eat. And it's natural. So that's really, really cool. So thank you for your help. I appreciate it. You can have a seat now. Thank you so much. Okay, so here is an interesting fact. Did you know that 90% of carbon and nitrogen in the raw organic material they're lost in the composting process because it gives off heat? Actually, it's lost. So if we don't want to just keep it in containers or keep these composts in these bins, let's put that back into the soil so that the soil around it has that carbon and that nitrogen that are naturally breaking down. So that's where when we dig in our sand, remember we talked about digging in our sand, and we put in all of the nice compost stuff that we made in these buckets, we dump it in there and we let all the nature break it down right there. So it's not in big bins anymore. We want to and what happens is it warms, it heats up, because as those animals are breaking all that bits down, it gives off heat. So it gets warm. And that is when you've got a lot of good energy going on for those plants. That's when it's telling you, hey, I'm making good plant food. So if you build it, they will come. Worms will come. Microorganisms, those little tiny things that you can't see unless you had a microscope. Gases, decomposition, fungi, minerals, all kinds of things will come. How about this? This is another little interesting fact. In many parts of England, a weight of more than 10 tons of dry earth annually passes through the bodies and is brought to the surface on each acre of land. It's brought through the bodies of the earthworms. Can you believe that? 10 tons of dry earth. Wow. Earthworms are waste recyclers, right? We just saw that. They're eating all that compost. But wait a minute, we've got a little bit of a problem. Earthworms can get sick too. And that's another reason why we don't want to add fertilizers, because when you have sick earthworms, you've got sick soil. And when you have sick soil, you're making a sick system. You don't want sick plants, because then when you eat sick plants, they make you sick. So we want to keep this system free of all kinds of chemicals that aren't natural. There was this really neat lady, and I've got a picture of her. Would you like to come up and look at this card with me? Here. These are like little playing cards, and you can look at the pictures of them. They're really neat, and they teach you all kinds of things about gardening. This lady here, her name was Ruth Stout. And Ruth Stout, here, you can look at it. Ruth Stout was the mulch queen. She would tuck kitchen scraps under straw or hay in her garden bed, and the carbon and the nitrogen is more likely to stay in the soil or mulch than to simply enter the atmosphere. And so Ruth did not just come up with this on her own. She was actually a very desperate gardener, because her tiller was supposed to come and till her ground, and he never showed up. So she had all this mulch, and she decided, you know what, to heck with it. I've got to do something with all this stuff. So she started dumping it, and she started noticing that, wow, everywhere I put this mulch and all these old composting things, the ground is really good and my plants are growing great. And I don't have to worry about weeding because all I have to do is put down my mulch and it takes care of it. Well, Ruth, thank you so much. Ruth was also a pioneer in gardening because we also learned through what Miss Stout did that soil can actually be killed. So you want to keep your soil covered. And how do we do that? We use hay. We use straw and hay. Now hay has seeds in it and straw doesn't. So once you have your good soil, you've done your composting, you're doing good, you've got your plants in the ground, cover it with straw, with hay. Put some beans in there and they'll sprout. And all the beans, when they grow up, the green, that's nitrogen. And when you've eaten the beans as much as you want to eat, cut the beans, let all that green stuff that you no longer eat, let it drop to the ground, and it becomes the nitrogen that the plants need all around it. It's a beautiful system. It takes care of itself, and you don't have to keep putting store-bought things in there and spending money that are unnecessary. So it works beautifully. It's a beautiful system. Here's another really interesting fact you might appreciate. As compost breaks down, the carbon and nitrogen go into the air. So composting actually contributes to greenhouse gases. And hot composting is a lot of work. It's better if you make your soil the compost, right? It's better if you make the soil the compost than to have it in bins or go out and try to buy it, because you're not doing anything good for the earth. You want to keep all that carbon and nitrogen right there into the ground. So one of the neat things about this, learning about plants and learning about important soil, is that there's highly acidic soil and there's highly alkaline soil. And you go, well, what's the difference in the two? Well, highly acidic, we're going to say the worst would be like a battery acid. If you've ever seen an old yucky battery, they just crust up and they're really not good. So plants don't even grow in that stuff. But just a little bit further on the scale, not too much acidic, and you have your blueberries, your pine trees, your black walnuts, and they're right at about a scale of about 4. You get down into the alkalinity of 6, which is more closer in the middle. So you don't want to go too alkaline, which would be on a scale of about 13 to 10, and too acidic, because your plants don't like it there. They like balanced soil. And the best way to have balanced soil is to copy what nature is doing. What happens when you go in the forest? You have these tall trees growing and their leaves fall down. And underneath those, there's other trees down below and the leaves fall down there. And as they keep falling, you notice all these leaves from top to bottom start falling into the ground, and they start breaking down and dying, and all the little bugs come up and eat it. And what happens when that occurs is that the soil becomes alive with all these little animals that like to eat the soil. And then they as the earthworms wiggle around that you saw there, they leave little gaps for the rainwater to trickle down into the roots. And they leave little gaps for seeds to fall right into the perfect hole for the next tree to grow. So what do? We don't have to go out and make it complicated and plant in straight lines. We want to do what the forest is doing. We want to put these tall trees in, like these nut trees, so we can have like pecans. How about that? That'd be good. Or maybe almonds. Right underneath that, you want to have like your fruit trees, right? Like your apples and your lemons and your oranges. And you want to put those underneath because they're a little smaller. Underneath that, you can have your bushes and your vines that grow up in those trees. And then after that, you can even have the smaller herbs. All your little basils and your spices that Mom puts in the spaghetti sauces and the salsa. And then even down to the very bottom, you have your mushrooms. And in your mushrooms, you have all the nutrients. And mushrooms are so cool because mushrooms actually run underground so far, and all the plants send the nutrients. When one plant is weak and it needs food, the mushroom tells that plant, hey, you need to get food over there. And so they send the food in from the soil through that way. So we just copy what nature's doing. We don't make it complicated. We don't put it in rows. We don't try to box it and make it something that's just where we have to go to the store and buy products and stick it in the ground. It's not that complicated. And what's beautiful about this system is where I lack, you may have. And what you may have, I may lack. So as we work together, we can share secrets, and we can share seeds, and we can share earthworms, and we can share what's going on in our soil and what's working and what doesn't work. And this is a great way to get started by turning your yucky old sand that doesn't grow very much at all, and you're having to do a lot of work to try to put some grass in there. Why don't you just put some mulch in there and get Mom to take those old fruits that you didn't want and stick them in the ground a little bit and cover it up with some hay or some straw and see what's going to grow, because wow, you may have the next forest right in your own backyard. Thank you.